This is Dolores Cannon again with the Metaphysical Hour. We're getting ready to start again, and I do have another guest tonight. Before we do, I want to give out the number. They have the new number now that is free, and it goes all over the world. Anyone in the world can call in on this number and be on the show if they want to. The number is 877-876-5227. 877-876-5227. This is a worldwide free number if you want to be on the show. And last week, when I was doing the interview, I made a remark that I had never had any call-ins. And then right in the middle of the show, I heard this voice come on saying, hello, hello, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And they said, well, you wanted somebody to call in. But we didn't have any notice it was going to happen. So Don, the man who runs all of this, said tonight, if that happens, he'll break in and let me know, so we'll at least be warned somebody is on the line. All right. My guest tonight is Patrick McNamara, and I've always known him as Father Pat. Even though he is no longer a priest, I still call him that because that's the way I've known him all these years. And I want him to give a little background about his background and where he has come from to get to this point. But I knew him, I first met him years ago when he was still a Roman Catholic priest. So he has come a long way since then. Okay, Pat, why don't you give them your background?
Hello, Dolores. Good to talk to you this evening. I thought for sure you'd have an intergalactic telephone number, too.
Well, that one, maybe it will reach intergalactically.
That would be good.
That voice last time sounded like a voice from beyond when it just suddenly
never know. You never know.
Okay, tell us about your background.
Great. I remember meeting you, Dolores, when I was Father Pat, and I think I had my collar on.
Yes, you did.
I was a Roman Catholic priest in the Diocese of San Diego for 15 years. I was actually raised Episcopalian, but since my dad had been married before, the rules of the church said he couldn't remarry without an annulment, so I was raised an Episcopalian as my mom was. And then when I was in law school, I happened to be living with a Catholic family, and I just felt this push to go to Mass with them one Sunday and just kind of see what it was all about again, because I'd been as a little boy with my dad. And I found a wonderful community. They were singing, and they were smiling faces, and everything seemed to be on the up and up. And so I thought, well, I'd like to investigate this a little bit more. And I just continued to feel the push inside to share this goodness and this happiness and this godness with other people. So I chose, when I was in law school, to go into the seminary and to learn more about how to share this message of an unconditionally loving God, because that's basically the conclusion I'd come to back then.
That's what you thought. You thought that anyway.
Well, I thought that. Right?
Yes, at the time. Okay.
Yeah. And then I think everything's in divine order, so I can't say unfortunately. I could say what happened in the seminary and eventually getting out into the parishes, into the trenches, as I usually say, it was quite different than my ideal. You know, I thought everybody was singing songs and smiling and loving one another, and I got into a little bit of the politics of it, the history, the secrecy, the rigidity, and the rules and regulations of the church. And so I was trying to balance that out with my message of love. And I think one of the ways that I did that was to be open to and explore alternative belief systems, alternative ways of expressing how much this God loves you. And that got into the areas that are in the book.
Uh-huh. But this is not what the church encouraged, though.
Oh, not at all. And, you know, I think I was really blessed because I only got called on the carpet once from my pastor when he found out that I was table tipping, and somebody had turned me in to him and said, well, he's having seances. So I said, well, no, that's not really happening. And he said, well, amazingly so, as a priest, he said, I'm a scientist. I taught science in Catholic high schools, he said, and this is hard for me to accept and believe, so it makes me nervous. So I would really, really prefer if you did not get involved with it. So I just said yes and then continued on my way. And I had met Adele Tinning, who was a table tipper through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and all of these horizons were just opening up more and more from the four walls of the church.
And you said you began to go to meetings and to explore metaphysics?
Right. The first part was basically with Adele Tinning, who was a table tipper, and she had monthly meetings, and I'd always be in the back. She would love to say that Father Pat was at her meetings because she believed that the churches were too limited, and she wanted people to see that some aspects of the church were not in this limited belief system, so that was me. And from that avenue, pardon me?
Well, Pat, will you explain to the ones what table tipping is in case they don't know what you're talking about?
There are so many forms of communication from God and Spirit, and this is a pretty, I'm going to say judgment here, archaic form of where Adele would put her hands on the table, and due to the conduit and clear intention that she had, she would ask the energy of Jesus, of any of the disciples. She worked with a lot of the disciples, or at one time my mother's energy came into the table, and the table actually tips up and then taps out the alphabet one letter at a time. So it was very slow, and if you went past it, you'd have to come back to it. But the messages were just fantastic about love and about a different path that wasn't...
What kind of table did she use?
People. You there?
What kind of table did she use?
You know, she used a regular kitchen-sized table, which was approximately, I'd say, 4 feet by 3 feet. But I've seen her lift a dining hall table. You know, one of those bingo tables, I always call them.
Wow!
She was just amazing, and she's a little old grandmother with arthritic hands, so she definitely wasn't moving it.
I was thinking of a card table, which would have been a lot easier to bake. You know?
Well, she eventually used that when she needed to. And but the trouble with that, well, I guess not the trouble with it, I was just led to expand beyond that into the areas of channeling.
Yeah.
Because as opposed to getting one letter at a time, which takes a long time to get a message, we can allow ourselves, I found out that we could allow ourselves to be open channels and pure energy to receive messages verbally and right through us, as opposed through the means of a table or a pendulum, or in the old days the Ouija board, all those evil things that the church thought were evil.
They were just different forms of communication, but of course, you know, we have to use them with the right intent as anything.
That's most important. I do a lot of work now in clearing the soul records, and it's very important. It's almost like saying a prayer beforehand. I go through a meticulous method to make sure that I'm getting in contact with the highest, purest information possible. And, you know, a long time ago, that's probably why the church, the Christian church at least, said that channeling and all the forms of communication with spirit were bad, because they didn't trust the common person enough to have this right connection. And so when they think that something isn't going to be used properly by the common man and woman, then they ban it. Say it's
that
evil.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
but you also investigated the psychic surgeons, didn't you?
Right. That was another, you know, I went from table tipping to channeling. One of my friends channeled, the one who we met, you and I together, Jackie, channeled Zarathustra.
Oh, yes. That's where I first met you.
Right. And
up around Seattle.
Up in Seattle, right. It was the great Northwest. And she had a friend named Alex Orbito, who was one of the world-famous psychic surgeons. And this is really crazy with me with my collar on, and he's a devout Catholic, a Filipino psychic surgeon healer man who's a devout Catholic. He loved to have Father Pat there and put me on the table, and I actually felt his hand go into my stomach and come out. Now, I always put the caveat, because I know that some people think I'm crazy when I talk about psychic surgery. I think that there are a lot of fakers out there. There are in religion.
Well, there's fakers in everything.
In every area, exactly. So again, we have to be discerning. But I've seen him without any sleeves on his shirt and nothing in his hands, and I've seen some miraculous things happen. And the point from there, it's almost like the point with channeling, is that, come on, the common man and woman need to wake up and realize that we're all called to be healers. We're all called to be communicators with spirit. And these are just methods that show us the way that we can do some of it.
Well, it's in the Bible, too, that Jesus said, you can do these things and more.
He said, anything you believe, whoever believes in me and the one who sent me will do all that I have done and far greater. And that was, for the people that quote the Bible, that's from John 14:12. And
but then the church turns around and says, no, he's the only one that can do these.
Only the priest can anoint. Only the priest can lay on their hands. Well, now they're saying that other people can do what is a charismatic healing. But basically, they're limiting that. And what Jesus was saying is that anybody can do this. And in 2,000 years since he's been around, we haven't seen too many people raising the dead or healing the sick. It's very interesting, is the way to put it, as opposed to judgmentally, right? So
that was something, too. We want to continue, but there was something I remember you said when you first met me, that you had read my books about Jesus and the Essenes, and that you said you were using the information when you were teaching the young people in your parish.
Exactly.
But you weren't telling them where the information came from, so they didn't know, that it wasn't part of the church teachings.
Well, I think I was a master in, I would call myself a multi-level communicator, because I knew that those younger people and adults too were hungry for the truth that would let them know how loved they are and how important they can be in this world. And all the messages that you had from Jesus and the Essenes, from They Walked with Jesus, which is totally acknowledging women in the church, which the church hasn't done. Here you're doing this research that says Jesus honored women and they walked with him and they were his teachers. So I used all of that in a roundabout way and say, yes, I know of sources that can empower you. And then I'd say, Dolores Cannon, go look it up. Yeah.
But, I have had a client who's come to me twice, who's a doctor out in California, and he goes once a month to see John of God down in Brazil.
Right. Yeah.
And he has built a house down there, so he goes down and stays with him once a month, and he actually helps John of God, and he with the psychic surgery. And he said he sits right next to him, and there's no way he could be a fake.
Yeah. I've just got some friends returning from John of God this weekend, and thank God they had that wonderful documentary on him this past year, and it shows, where he's using that instrument up the nose. You just can't fake that. Mm-hmm. And people have to just realize that you can't limit God, and that God will heal in any way possible, on any level possible.
But there's so many people out there trying to say all of it is charlatans and tricks, because they don't want anyone to think there could be something bigger than us.
There's a part of me that probably has held on to a lot of anger about that and a lot of frustration that people are so rigid and limited.
Yeah.
And yet there's another part of me that says, well, even some people had to believe in Santa Claus for a while to know about goodness and gifts. And so I'm trying really, really as hard as I can not to be too judgmental. But the fundamentalist and the